Good morning. Hopefully the live stream doesn't get cut off midway today like it did yesterday. We are in and should be wrapping up Exodus chapter 4. Let's see what I can do with this last little section here. A quick minor public service announcement. If ever the live stream gets cut off like midway, I usually hop back on and try and finish up what I was saying. But it depends on when you jump on, because if you're like behind, it kind of cuts off when I get off. So if you were not, up to time, anyway, let's just study the Bible together, shall we? So Exodus 4, starting in verse 27, and the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. Oh, nope, backing up. It's verse 24 we are in. And it came to pass on the way at the encampment that the Lord met him and sought to kill Moses. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at Moses' feet and said, surely you are a husband of blood to me. So God let him go. Then she said, you are a husband of blood because of the circumcision. And the Lord said to Aaron, well, let's pause right there, I guess. There's a nice little short bit. I'm happy mother and daughter get to join in. Here we are talking about this fun motherly moment, right? So you need sons, though. That's what you guys are lacking. Mothers of all daughters. Right, ladies? All right. Aside from commentary specific to Arla and Sarah, so this is an interesting little story. And I think even more interesting and confusing, and I mean, just trying to wrap your minds around the whole, her circumcising the son and casting the foreskin at Moses' feet. What about in verse 24 where it says that God sought to kill Moses? Crazy, right? Now, once again, there always are these anthropomorphisms in the Bible where we use terms, phrases, descriptions for God that technically can't be true. Just like saying, that's a sad looking car that guy's driving. The car is not actually sad, but we use the word sad to paint a picture. So it's interesting when you say the Lord sought to kill Moses, because, the Lord knows that he's not going to kill Moses. And yet, God must have made it clear, seemingly to Zipporah, that if Moses left undone the circumcision of his children, that God would take his life. Now, God knew how this would play out, but Zipporah goes and she circumcises their son, casts it at his feet, and she's not very happy about this situation. Now, I think the most important thing to understand, though, is that Moses was being called into the ministry of leading his people. And if we cannot fulfill the most basic of requirements with our own children in our own homes, well, then how are we fit to lead? Let me flip quickly to the New Testament, to 1 Timothy chapter 3. 1 Timothy really, about midway through chapter 2 to midway through chapter 3, it is all about church leadership, church structure, positions, leadership in the church, church order. That's 1 Timothy 2 and 3. And in verse 1 of chapter 3, it says, this is a faithful saying. So this is something worth noting. It's faithful, it's important. If a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. So this is the position of overseer, one who looks over the church. Now, this term can be used very explicitly and specifically to speak of like the pastor. This is a chapter I would take someone to if they want to know the qualifications of being a pastor. But it can also be used in a much more general sense, the word, to just oversee. And people who aren't pastors help oversee the church as well. Elders help oversee. And there's other people who oversee the worship ministry, the children's ministry, the other things. People oversee things. But if you're going to be a person with people under you, leading in spiritual things, typically, this looks at the spiritual oversight. So maybe not the person in charge of the yard, groundskeeper. But it says it's a good thing. It's a faithful saying, and it's a good thing if you want a desire to be a leader. And I would always actually challenge every man and woman, why wouldn't you? Now, again, like you might not be called to this role or that role, but to be brought to a place where God is using you in a higher up position. That's the idea. It's not necessarily you're going to be a pastor or an elder, because not everyone's called to that. That's a calling of God that he puts upon a person. But to desire to be used by God is a good thing. Now, I'm trying to get this back to Moses, because it says in verse 4, one of the qualifications is one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Recently, my wife and I have been talking just about how we're doing things in our home and what we're doing with our kids. And though Enrique thinks my kids are okay, still talking about the level of obedience we desire in our children, the level of commitment and fruit bearing we desire to see in our marriage, and recognizing that this is a qualification for ministry that it seems like people just kind of breeze over. It's like, got to be able to teach. That's a really big deal. That guy can't use drugs, and he better be good with money, can't steal. But if the marriage is on the rocks, or the kids aren't really being trained up in the Lord, well, then at some point priorities were taken out of place, and it needs to be fixed. And so I do think this is a serious qualification for leadership, that men need to be seriously investing in their wives, seriously investing in their children. And I think in America today, the status quo and the norms we see have greatly damaged our biblical view on what family is supposed to look like. When everyone else, we have the what my dad used to call them, dinks, double income, no kids. They're both working their jobs. They come together and do their thing, and they don't even have kids to raise. Or people with kids, and it's like, well, you ship them away. They go to school, you send them away to Caesar and wonder why they come home as Romans, right? I mean, this is the thing where it just becomes this thing where our kids are normal compared to other kids. but are they normal compared to what God's standards are? Our marriage might seem okay compared to the average American marriages, but do we see husbands loving their wives and sacrificing all for them and washing them in the word and sanctifying their wives? Do we see wives joyfully submitting to their husbands because it's just a natural byproduct of his leadership? When we see the picture of marriage and the home in the Bible, it paints a big different picture than what we see often in the church today. And so here in Exodus, Moses is going to be a leader, an overseer, and his wife gets really frustrated with him. And God obviously is really frustrated. God was going to kill him, it said, because he hadn't even circumcised his own kids. Now, the circumcision today isn't quite the deal it was then, right? But to the Jew, circumcision was really the chief of all of their, you might call it like a sacrament, really, in a sense, for the Jews, right? I mean, this is something where the Sabbath was holy, but you could still, normally you couldn't do any other medical procedures on the Sabbath, but you could do a circumcision because it was more important. The covenant of circumcision was more important than even keeping the Sabbath. So, I mean, that kind of paints a picture for you. And so God wants us to make sure we're taking care of our homes before we take care of anything else. And yet, it's a good thing and a faithful thing for us to desire to go and do these other things. I think we just got to get our priorities in line, or take a word of wisdom from Enrique, Bachelor to the Rapture. Many of us have already made our decision. He who finds a wife finds a good thing. And so just a consideration on our priorities, on making sure we're investing and that we're not setting off to go conquer this and that and leaving the more important things undone. What's the rest of our text? Let's just take a look. Verse 27 of Exodus 4. And the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness and meet Moses. And so he went and met him on the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words the Lord had sent him and all the signs which he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. Then he did the signs in the sights of the people. So the people believed, and when they heard the Lord, that he had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked on their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshipped. So Moses got his home in order, and now he goes off and sets off on his mission. And so, yeah, let's make sure we have our personal walks with the Lord, our marriages, our children and our family, those things all in order before we set off on the missions which God has set us on. All right, Exodus 5 tomorrow. God bless you guys, and I will see you guys then.